Okay, I'd like to talk about chapter 29 on semantic concepts, and I have it in chapter 27 for a reason. But remember that in this book, logic is made of sort of two halves, right? There's the semantics half and the syntax half. Syntax half. Syntax corresponds to the literal symbols we use to write things down, the way we order them, what constitute a sentence. We've talked about what a sentence was in first order logic already. And semantics is the sort of parallel notion of truth and how do you know things are true and things like that. Now, in chapter 27, we went through this definition of an interpretation. And it was these things. We have a domain, which is the universe of objects that we're considering. For every sentence letter, if we have a sentence letter like a TFL sentence letter, we give it a truth value. Semantics in TFL was just a matter of choosing truth values for the sentence letters. So if we're going to use TFL sentence letters in our first order logic, we have to do that. Any name, so any like named constants, we have to assign each lowercase letter between A and I think R to an object in the domain. If we're going to use it. If we don't use it, then we don't have to assign it. And for each predicate, we have to give it, what things it's true of. Now, saying what things it's true of could mean listing them, as we saw in many examples, or it could mean describing them in some way. That's sort of akin to how you use set builder notation to do things. So, chapter 29, semantic concepts. This is going to be the same kind of thing we did in the past with evaluations, but now it's for interpretations because that's sort of the first order logic analog of what in TFL were called valuations. So we'll still use this double turn style thing. And you'll recall in TFL, if I had a list of sentences, double turn style, another sentence of TFL, then what that meant was I can't come up with a counterexample. Okay, it means it's valid. Okay, and validity again was this notion of, well, you can't have a counterexample, so it's valid. Okay, and so we would say that these things entail this thing, meaning in TFL it meant that there's no interpretation that simultaneously made the things on the left, the premises, true, and also the conclusion false. So that would be a counterexample, and if you had a counterexample, then it would not be a valid argument. It was kind of a strange idea because if you had a conclusion that was necessarily false, then if you had premises that were necessarily false, you couldn't construct a counterexample because, well, it'd be impossible to make the premises true if one of them was necessarily false. So, we want to upgrade that to first order logic. So, we just replace the word valuation with interpretation. So we'll write this with respect to first order logic to mean there is no interpretation, an interpretation being what I described a minute ago, in which all these sentences are true and the conclusion is false. Clearly, this would mean that that's true in every interpretation. In other words, it's somehow a tautology in some way or another. So we have all kinds of other corresponding notions from TFL that carry over to first order logic without trouble. So instead of the word tautology, we have the word validity. So a sentence is a validity if it can be if it's sort of necessarily true. Okay, it's true without any assumptions, that kind of thing, just like a tautology was. It's true in every interpretation. Contradiction means it's false in every interpretation. We use that word in TFL as well. This argument is valid in first order logic, means there is no interpretation for which the premises are true and the conclusion is false. Just like what valid meant in TFL, and invalid, means otherwise. That is, there is an interpretation which makes the premises true, and a conclusion false. That would be an invalid argument. Two sentences are equivalent if their truth values match in all interpretations. Okay, and jointly satisfiable means there's an interpretation that makes all of them true, and jointly unsatisfiable means there is no such interpretation. That's it for chapter 29. There's nothing else to it. Basically, it pulls up all the words from TFL that we look through and reinterprets them in terms of interpretations, and that's it.